Chapter 3, Part 2. Evening came. Shadows grew longer, the air cooler. Ahead, the boys started down a long, twisting flight of stone stairs cut out of the hillside bedrock to avoid the longer, more gradual slope generally used for carts and livestock. Gabriel was off the path among the trees, knee-high in purple clover and ragweed, impressed with the progress the boy had made. He had been more resolute than Gabriel had given him credit for. The sky became visible to his left as the trees on the mountainside thinned more and more. The path they traveled cut through a crevice in the protective Subring Mountains that encircled the immense Tungulin Valley like a giant wall, and they were now passing down into the other side. As Gabriel drew closer, he could now see why the boy kept stopping and staring. Tungulin came into view through the pines. The castle city shone as bright as a shrine, silver white and fair from on top of a solitary mountain base set in the direct center of an immense, circular, bowl-shaped valley. It was enormous. No single king or people could claim creation of this architectural monument. Lifetimes upon lifetimes of constant, loving architectural labor were to be credited for her massive construction. The main body of the intricate castle stood 4 or 5 times the size of the huge tundra trees that lined the lowland forest valley. The highest towers were wreathed in clouds of pearl white, her blue and green flowing banners whipped in the upper winds. Great white birds soared above the trees of the valley below his vista view. Gabriel watched the boy continue his slow descent down the stairs until he came to a wide lip in the trail, offering a magnificent view of the Tungulin Valley. Then, as Gabriel watched, the boy's weak leg wobbled and appeared to give out. He dropped the walking stick he had been using as his knee buckled and he fell to the ground. Gabriel broke from his cover, bounding over the wall, and he descended down the rocks like a sure-footed mountain goat until he reached the boy's side. "I told you," he said. "Are you hurt?" The boy frowned when he saw him. "You followed me," he said, gritting his teeth. "I knew you wouldn't make it the rest of the way on your own," Gabriel said. "Obviously, I was right. Obviously, you don't know me very well. Otherwise, you would have left me alone. I can reach Tungulin without any more of your so-called help." "You ungrateful, egotistical brat! You wouldn't have gone another 100 yards without a pair of crutches." "Well, if that's what I have to do to get rid of you, I'll carve a pair." The boy stopped in mid-sentence, and his eyes went wide, looking over Gabriel's right shoulder. "Gabriel!" Gabriel felt his blaster jerk from his holster before he knew what was happening. He sprung around to find the 2 assassins before him, weapons already drawn and ready. He knew who they were. Their reputations were legendary. "You two." "Careless," Habad said, smiling with a mouth that separated his face from ear to ear. "That was much too easy." He backed away, placing Gabriel's blaster loosely in his twisted belt. Habad was nearly as tall as Gabriel, but much thinner, sharp bones protruding like horns from his knees, ankles, elbows, and wrists. His skin was a pale, dirty, olive green color, cracked and dry. The scattered tufts of hair on his spotted head were dingy red. The unkempt tangles blew about freely in the mountain updraft. He wore 2 earrings in each ear and another in his flat nose. As he spoke, his pale yellow forked tongue flicked in and out of his thin white lips, dispensing spit like a sputtering fountain. "You are much easier to track today after eluding us so well for so long. Too kind to too many passers-by along the way, I'm afraid, today. They were all too eager to tell us which direction you were heading. Pity, too, because you almost made it." Terzda, the brute, stood silently behind him with a look of perverse reverence on his diseased face. The boy backed away toward a pile of rocks behind him. "Habad and Terzda," Gabriel said, trying to find a way out of this dire situation. "You both look exceptionally well since the last time I saw you, rotting away in shackles in a Bersian jail, I do believe." He stood with his back facing a sheer drop to jagged rocks far below. The boy was safe for the moment, perched on a boulder to his left, although Habad's beady eyes darted at him time and time again. "What were the charges that time, Habad? Murder and necrophilia again, wasn't it?" "We escaped from all that," Habad said, "and we left a bloody mess." "Well, good for you, Habad. Gabriel said. The assassins stood directly before him, blocking the trail from which they came. The path to the right, towards Tungulin, was left unguarded. Gabriel Din Diane, we have no quarrel with you, Habad told him, as if reading his mind. He nodded toward Tungulin. You may be on your way if you so choose. They're the ones who hurt me, the boy said obstinately, but it was clear that he was truly frightened of them. Oh, we'll do much worse this time if you don't give us the damn key, Habad hissed. Gabriel glanced up at the boy. The key? The boy returned the glance. What key? Habad was watching Gabriel's expression. Yes, the key. Very special, this key. Didn't he tell you about it? He stayed rather quiet during his brief visit with us, too. That's why he hobbles so. I hid it in Turzdaw's belt, the boy snapped, in the back, where his fat head couldn't see it. Then I took it back after you both passed out. Sleeping, Habad corrected, while we were sleeping. Sleeping in such a drunken stupor that I spat on you before I left. I call that passed out. Yes, well, semantics and interpretations, Habad said, smiling again. You're right, of course. Forgive me. You were clever enough to escape. Kudos. He looked at Gabriel. He stole our skycraft and, poof, he was gone. We were quite impressed. And how lucky he was to have made it up over Rotten Gayloth before the fuel ran out. Miracle, really. Turzdaw stepped closer. Gabriel watched the huge brown muscles begin flexing in the giant assassin beast's arms. The evil creature began breathing heavier as he bared his animal fangs. His black eyes were filled with red veins. He leaned forward on his battle axe, gripping it tightly with his four-fingered hands. He was barely clothed in thick leathers, fur, and brass, and he wore shrunken heads on the rungs of his spiked brass belt. Gabriel never took his eyes off of Turzdaw for more than a split second. Why do you want this key? He asked him. What does it unlock? Habad's tongue flicked jubilantly. Who knows for sure? There's a reward for it, you see. It will bring us greater wealth than all of our other jobs have ever done rolled into one. I plan to retire once I receive my reward. Turzdaw here, I'm afraid, is driven by other demons. He will go on with the legacy we built together, I suspect. I have little control over him anymore, so, he said, eyes sharp and businesslike, without further ado, the key, please. All eyes turned to the boy. Absolutely not, the young man stated unflinchingly. Despite his frail size and stature, he appeared proud and grim like a mighty general. It is mine to protect. You'll have to kill me to get it. As expected, Habad said, turning to see what Gabriel's reaction would be. Gabriel's countenance was just as resolute. Habad was a worthy opponent himself. Turzdaw, on the other hand, was a living, breathing mountain. How he could possibly defeat them both without a blaster was incomprehensible. Still, he had no choice. He couldn't let them harm this boy again. And you'll have to go through me to get to him, he told them. So be it, Habad said, shrugging his bony shoulders. He stepped aside to watch the upcoming show. Turzdaw, you may begin. So be it, snarled the sweating brute that swayed menacingly behind him. I told you, Habad. It was destiny all along. Gabriel quickly took in the surroundings, analyzing the nearby saplings, the slope of the ground, the amount of steps to the cliff edge where pebbles might break away underfoot. He moved slowly, circling to the left, arms extending out to his sides. Sweat trickled down Turzdaw's skin like rain over a rock. He flexed his muscles, tensed, relaxed. Tensed, relaxed. He began snorting air through his wide nostrils like an angry bull, grinding his yellow teeth together, making a horrible scraping sound. As the grotesque beast advanced, Gabriel met him eye to eye. Turzdaw lifted the axe as wide as a shovel plow with one hand, apparently without any effort whatsoever. Gabriel stepped to the left, knowing that his razor sword was no match for Turzdaw's heavy battle axe. The beast mirrored the motion, pressing Gabriel closer to the edge. I I would get just as much satisfaction if you leaped off this cliff like a coward, Terzda told him. You don't necessarily need to go through all this pain and humiliation first. Before Terzda finished his sentence, Gabriel dashed at him, pulling a knife from his boot sheath in one quick movement as he rolled. He plunged it full force into the creature's stomach, then danced to the side, just missing the grasp of a huge brown hand. Habad cheered from the side. Terzda looked at the trickle of blood that rolled down his gut to the matted fur of his leather breeches, then up at Gabriel. Oh, you're fast, he said, surprised and amused. And devious, that's good. To Gabriel's astonishment, the blade had done little damage to Terzda's thick skin. The assassin had turned in time to make the blow glance off to the side. Habad was laughing. I swear, I don't think he has any nerve endings at all, that Terzda. As Terzda came toward him, this time moving faster, Gabriel found the beast's reddened eyes unnerving. They almost had an odd glowing quality to them. The battle axe came up, slashing at him with a speed that Gabriel would never have believed, barely missing him. Again the blade, as wide as Gabriel's shoulders, cut through the air, then again, and again, forcing him backwards too fast to keep his balance. His foot slipped on crumbling rock. He seized a limb of a small tree that grew at the very edge of the precipice, catching himself. One mighty chop sent the tree sailing over the brink. Gabriel teetered, heels hanging off over the edge. Meanwhile, Habad had crawled up toward the boy, displaying the poisoned knife that had previously injured him so badly. Come here, you, he hissed. You remember this blade, do you not? The boy attempted to crawl away backwards, but found himself cornered in the rocks. The eyes were desperate. Gabriel, he cried. Terzda was suddenly losing his footage on loose pea gravel, and he slid, almost stumbling. Gabriel ducked under his outstretched hand, seized the beast's belt, and swung around behind him, clearing the edge of the cliff. With a quick sprint up the rocks and a leap, he knocked Habad's feet out from under him, sending the surprised assassin tumbling down the jagged rocks and into the weeds at the cliff's edge. Climb higher, he shouted to the boy. The boy saw Gabriel's bastard slip from Habad's belt, rattling off into the rocks near his feet. Gabriel, watch out, he cried, looking up. Coming up quickly from behind, Terzda seized Gabriel by the ankle and spun him spinning like a rag doll across the dirt clearing toward the edge of the cliff. He barely stopped in time with one leg dangling over. Gabriel, the boy cried as an angry Habad started back up the rocks after him. Help me! Gabriel tried to shout back, but Terzda kicked him in the side with a brass-toed boot, sending him rolling, now both legs dangling out over the ledge of the precipice. He cried out in desperation as he struggled, grasping for anything he could to keep from sliding off. Should have jumped, Terzda said, sneering as he walked over to him. He straddled Gabriel's head and raised the axe high overhead, intending to split the man right down the middle with one defining blow. Gabriel, I am Terzda the Great, your battle master. It is time for you to pass through the door of the dark valley. Gabriel was quickly losing his grip and expected to feel Terzda's huge blade split his spine in two at any second. Then he heard a sudden cry, and there was a blast that shook his grip loose. He slid, fingernails digging desperately at the rock. Terzda wailed above him. He dropped his axe and surged forward, putting a boot within Gabriel's reach. Gabriel grabbed a bootstrap just in time to keep from falling over into the abyss. Terzda then stumbled backwards, unintentionally pulling the prince back up with him. The great beast toppled over onto the ground on his back, howling in a painful rage. From there, Gabriel could see what had just happened. The boy had somehow retrieved the blaster before Habad could get to it, and with a lucky shot, he had torn a big piece of Terzda's shoulder off with it. Gabriel got to his feet and looked down at his mortally wounded opponent. Terzda! Habad wailed from above. What have they done to you? Gabriel quickly lifted the axe by the handle, dragging it toward the cliff. It was even heavier than it looked. Terzda saw what was happening and spun over, coming up onto his knees as he howled, dragging his limp left arm in the dirt. With a lunge, he grabbed the huge blade before Gabriel could get it over the edge, and he held on to it tight. "I'm not done with you yet, Prince," he growled. Habad was boiling. He felt foolish and ashamed at what had happened. He snatched the blaster back from the boy and slapped him hard across the face, sending him to the ground. "You insignificant fool," he cried. He looked at Terzdah's bloody, wounded shoulder. A white bone protruded from the gnarled meat. Things had gone very wrong. "Enough of this! Let's end it now," he barked to his injured comrade. He pointed Gabriel's own powerful gun at the boy's face at point-blank range and fired. The flash of light was unusually bright. For a moment there was a strange sensation where there was no sound at all. A few seconds of electrified bright white nothingness, then there was a hideous scream. Habad's scream. "No!" Gabriel cried. The shot echoed through the hills. Renewed rage and power instantly filled him like nothing he had ever felt before. With all his might, he jerked the axe from Terzdah's hands, and he slung it out over the edge. It sailed off into the valley below. Habad was still screaming as if in absolute terror. Eyes glowing as red as molten lava, Terzdah's maniacal anger metamorphosed into an uncontrollable hatred for this human. He landed a blow to Gabriel's head with his hammer-like fist, sending the man to the ground hard. His head bounced like a rubber ball on the ground. As he rose, dazed, the assassin swung again, but he was able to duck the blow this time. The monster, off balance, fell forward onto his face, and it sounded as though the bone in his already wounded shoulder shattered with the impact. The beast wailed. Gabriel pulled his long, razor-sharp sword from his sheath, straddling the assassin's hairy back, and he seized a handful of hair on his broad, sweaty neck. "And I am done with you," he cried. Terzdah howled. He took hold of Gabriel's right leg and squeezed. The muscle and tissue crushed in his vice-like grip, the bones nearly shattering, sending a chill of pain rippling throughout the prince's body. With a cry of anguish, Gabriel jerked the beast's head to the side, and with a tremendous effort, he plunged his sword through the thick hide of Terzdah's neck and out the other side, all the way up to the jeweled hilt. The beast screamed. Again and again, the sword pierced his great throat from behind like a giant pincushion until there was no doubt left. Terzdah could not survive such a thrashing. For a second, they paused. The outcome was now inevitable. Gabriel had slain the great Terzdah. His throat filling rapidly with blood, Terzdah squalled pitifully in pain and anger. He thought of defeat by this measly human was infuriating and unacceptable to him, even in the throes of his own death. He was not going to die and rot on this cliff under the eyes of accursed Tungulin. He could not end in such a dishonorable way. Not if he had 1 ounce of strength left in him. Everyone would climb up there to mock him, to watch the vultures peck out his eyes. He would not allow that disgrace to happen. His faltering mind turned to the nearby cliff. He could not speak with his throat shredded to ribbons, but he gurgled a hideous sound that resembled macabre laughter. If they both fell over the cliff together, there would be no victor and no defeated. "Die! Die, you bastard!" Gabriel cried, trying to kick himself free from the steely grip that had begun to sever his leg from his body. Sweat, dirt, and blood blurred his vision. His royal robes were filthy, bloody, and torn to shreds. He tried to look about the clearing for the boy, but both he and Habad were nowhere to be seen. Blood spewed everywhere. Barely able to get a breath, Terzdah came to his one hand and knees and began crawling to the cliff, dragging the prince along beside him. Gabriel dug his fingers into the dirt. He grabbed a root and held as tight as he could, but Terzdah ripped him away like pulling a loose thread from a cloak. Terzdah stopped just feet away from the cliff edge, his strength waning. He choked and coughed, trying to grasp at his mutilated neck with his free hand to try to stop the profuse blood flow, but his maimed shoulder prevented him from doing it. He fell forward, whipping Gabriel against a tree trunk. He coughed up more blood Then, with a tremendous effort, he spun over and hung the prince completely out over the ledge. Suddenly, there was no ground under Gabriel, only a towering drop to a sudden and final destination. Swinging up, Gabriel grabbed Terzda's chain bracelet just as the beast opened his mighty hand, releasing Gabriel's leg. Gabriel swung. His injured leg hit a rock and he screamed in pain. Terzda surged forward, shaking his hand back and forth, trying to dislodge Gabriel from his bracelet. Gabriel reached around desperately for any hold, a rock, a root, anything. Terzda's pallid face came over the edge right above him, cold and red-eyed. Various body fluids poured from his face and his neck and out of his mouth and nose, raining down onto Gabriel. Terzda pulled his chest to the edge, his weighted arm dropping over vertically. Gabriel bounced, but was still able to keep hold. Only a few more inches to crawl before Terzda would lose balance, and they would both leave the precipice, falling to death together. Gabriel could not hold on to the chain any longer. His fingers were being cut in two. He began seeing spots of color dancing before his eyes, beautiful colored lights, dazzling and bright. As these lights began to turn into a vivid, warm white, all the pain seemed to seep away, draining down through his body and out the tips of his toes. Just then, 2 blaster shots rang out and chips of charred stone and dust scattered. The sound momentarily jolted Gabriel back into the world of the living. He shut his eyes to protect him from the shattering debris and held on with all his might. Terzda's bloody body quivered and went limp, eyes returning to black for the last time. Gabriel struggled to hold on, dangling, but again he felt consciousness slowly slipping away. All right, the final part right here. "My name is Farindin," said the squatty little man who had saved Gabriel's life. The cart they were in hit a pothole and everything bounced. Gabriel detected the sound of smooth stone rattling beneath the wooden cart wheels like an actual paved road instead of a dirt and loose rocks. He knew that they must be nearing the city. He was in shock and could not see very well. Everything was unfocused and vague. He couldn't remember how he had gotten into the cart, nor could he remember how he had gotten back up onto the top of the cliff. The man was still talking. "I'll bet you think I'm a warrior of some kind, huh? I'm a Tungulin farmer and proud of it." From where he lay in the back of the small cart, Gabriel could only see the farmer's broad back and the old beagle who sat beside him, eyes intently fixed upon the injured Persian prince. Gabriel smelled coal and realized he was lying in a wagon full of it, black and dusty. He attempted to bend his leg, but bolts of pain stopped him, radiating from his ankle to his hip. As a reminder of the encounter, Terzda had left 4 huge black and blue fingerprints outlined on Gabriel's bare leg. Feeling had returned to his foot, but he was afraid that there would be serious damage to the tendons and ligaments around his knee. It was at this point that he realized that someone was holding his hand. He turned his head and saw a hazy figure silhouetted in the setting sun setting beside him. He raised his head and squinted to see. To his complete bewilderment, he saw that it was the boy, alive and unharmed. "How?" he started to say, but he became dizzy and had to lay his head back down. The farmer continued talking, though his words sounded slurred and hollow to Gabriel. He tried to listen, but time seemed to be speeding up and slowing down to him. "I was on the nearby ridge collecting some flint and coal for my brother, who runs a fire store in the city. I heard a shot and jumped clean out of my britches. I suspected that it came from the lookout, so I grabbed my blast rifle and dashed up the hill, leaving my Rama and cart near the cave where I was mining. The cart hit a rut. Gabriel cringed. Then I heard another shot and somebody cried out, 'No!' Gabriel thought about what he could remember, what had happened. The first shot is when the boy shot Terzda in the shoulder, he mumbled. The second shot was... Gabriel paused long enough to look at the boy again, confused. 'When Habad killed you.' The boy's expression, what Gabriel could see of it, was one of both concern and also utter confusion. Gabriel could see dirty trails on the boy's cheeks. He had been crying. The farmer continued on with his story. I saw something like a big axe fall off the cliff and a lot of rubble, so I ran faster. I didn't know what to expect. Just then a dirty red-headed man thing, ugliest thing I ever saw, mutant Tiberlian maybe, come running down the road right past me, crying like he'd seen a ghost or something. I got to say I ain't never seen fear in a face like that before. I let him go without a shot fired. I figured he was harmless enough. Gabriel did not take his eyes off the boy. He shot you, point blank, right in the head. I saw it. He couldn't have missed. He didn't miss. I saw. The farmer had paused his storytelling for a moment to try to reenact the horrid face of Habad. When I reached the top, I saw the boy first, standing alone, staring at his hands, as if he were somehow amazed by them. Next, I saw the big nasty fellow, and I saw what he was trying to do to you, and so I took me 2 shots, and well, it was all over. I just had to pull you up, which wasn't an easy task in itself, and here we are on the doorstep of Tungulin. Gabriel struggled to sit up. The boy aided him. Traffic along the road was moderately active for that hour. Other animal-drawn carts and travelers gliding in small industrial and recreational skycraft moved by at various speeds. Shopkeepers and vendors were, for the most part, closing up for the day. The cart rounded a broad curve that led to the main gate of Tungulin. 11 tall walls protected the castle city, with only one wide, heavily guarded entrance in the first and largest southernmost outer wall. Farron Din called out to the people ahead to let them pass by as they reached the first grand gate. Everyone seemed to know the old-timer and let him pass without question. The 6-legged Rama, pulling their cart, did the best she could as she shuffled along, heeding her master's light whip, sound of it, not touch, head bobbing like a bouncing ball. Ramas were not known for their speed, but for their strength and endurance. Now the boy here says that it was a fierce, world-renowned assassin up there. Whether there's any reward or not, I reckon I'll be a hero to my own family at least, the farmer happily said. I better get my story straight before everyone comes a-asking. Then he started his tale again from the very beginning. Howdy there, folks. I bet you think I'm a warrior of some kind, but I'm a Tungulin farmer and proud of it. His beagle barked. The story sounded good to him. Things began getting dark in Gabriel's eyes. Are you going to be all right? The boy asked him. Gabriel nodded. His eyelids were getting too heavy to hold up. I'm starving, though. The boy smiled. I'll prepare a feast for you, I promise. I'm going to rest now for a bit, Gabriel said as he fell again into unconsciousness. The boy gripped Gabriel's hand tightly. Hurry on, farmer. Never you mind about getting your story straight right now, he said. This man cannot die. Get this cart to a doctor straight away. Faster, man! The end of Chapter 3, Tungulin. If you're enjoying the story, please subscribe to my YouTube page with that little button right there. Bing! And then there's a little doohickey right next to it that I think it makes it like your favorite, so everything new will at least appear when you go to your YouTube subscriptions. See you for Chapter 4, The Emergency Secret Council, next.